This video was initially meant to come out on May 14th, this character's birthday. But I got sick. We're still doing a video on this because I love this character to pieces, and we are going to talk about how I came up with her. My name is Amy Rosenfeld, and I'm telling you the story of how Abby Tacker from ASTER'S CODA Exposure came to life. Many of you, I hope, would have initially heard about how I came up with the story of ASTER'S CODA. I wondered why female heroes weren't portrayed in similar ways to male heroes at the time when I came up with this. Good old 2013. Females were secondary, sidekicks, sexualized. Granted, their reputation is somewhat improving, but not drastically. And back in 2013, heroes who were female in the media were a rarer case. And you might have remembered that Abby was conceptualized as a cyborg with red hair, ginger red hair, fighting a room full of suited men. Very different from the portrayal that we now see today. So let's dive into how we got there. At the time, one of my primary school besties and I had split apart. We weren't going to different high schools, intermediate schools I should say. We still didn't go to different high schools, and we were living on opposite ends of the same city. But while we were apart, we discovered we both had a strong love for creative writing, and she introduced me to Wattpad. And you can hear more about my Wattpad story, which I recited last year, by clicking up here. I ended up writing and publishing Abby's story on Wattpad based on that cyborg portrayal. I decided this plot bunny was worth chasing down the rabbit hole, starting with the first book in which Abby gets kidnapped, gains some suspicious powers, and she has to learn what they are, and it indicated that she had become a cyborg, which basically in my world was a human who by magical means got turned into an android. Severely inaccurate in retrospect, considering this was all achieved by an injection. And I was getting her story into my head largely by writing on the seat of my pants. A very cliche kind of superhero origin story that in retrospect read more like the first two acts of a story. Act 1 in that book was hinting that there was a world out there. Act 2 was her discovering these powers. Act 3 was confirming that these worlds exist, and then she got kidnapped and someone else she knew got powers because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and yeah, it was weird as hell. And so many characters from that story got cut. But here's what I wanted to achieve with Abby and her story in the 5-book series when I initially planned it. From the get-go, I always imagined her as ginger, and this being like a signifier for her trademark, so to speak. It was one thing that never changed. I really wanted her portrayal to be youthful, authentic, and this idealization of a teen. But what I really wound up writing was a Manic Pixie dream girl. This was long before I realized what the term meant. Her first-person writing style was obnoxiously similar to Percy Jackson, to the point where it kinda disgusted me. Her set character traits existed, but contradicted each other immensely. It made her feel melodramatic in some cases and not reacting properly in others, and she was so quirky. Pair that with a plot with about as much skeleton as a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, and it made her story such a pain to write the further you went into it. It was due for a rewrite and due to be taken off of Wattpad. So when it came to rewriting her story, quite a fair bit changed from day one. As I repieced a bunch of the world and plot together, I realized she should be a lot more fearful. This wasn't a story for the naive optimist that I initially wrote her as. Someone who realized how much the world around her, or multiple worlds I should say, was not wanting her to survive. Abby ends up being a girl in this series who grows up too fast. She has now degrees of maturity along with a lot of vulnerabilities. When I think of Abby and how I created her in the rewrite, I often go back to her weaknesses and how they defined her when she looked at herself. But at the same time, a lot of her weaknesses end up becoming her strengths later on. Her stubbornness, her ties to her emotions, how little she knows about the world, but ends up being really curious to learn more. I think by accident I may have coded her as a character with anxiety. I don't want to say that outright because I haven't done any research or professional consulting about anxiety as a disorder. She at least has mental health issues, you know. from the start dealing with grief and bullying. And when I was writing this series in particular, I realized that mental health would be a field of study I want to go into if I hadn't taken up communications at university instead. I enjoy observing and learning about them through like YouTube videos, and just talking about mental health with myself and some of my friends is just something interesting to go into as well. Just learning why we tick in the ways that we do. I deal with mental health a bit more explicitly later in the series, as later books deal with stuff like PTSD and generational trauma, as Abby realizes the truth about her situation and her family history and how it got to be the way that it was for her. Her powers are now also worth mentioning. How she is attuned with electricity and is able to conjure it, control it, absorb it to different degrees in the surrounding worlds. This initially stemmed from her being a cyborg and her having a much smaller and very niche array of powers. I decided to lean more into the electric side of things. Electricity is just a wild, dangerous thing, and every character in other books and media who I see wielding electricity are just straight up badasses. And the way we've become more used to using electricity in our lives, and the way that we use it and like command what it basically does through technology, I wanted to kind of lean into that but with a person and get some abilities from there. It just felt so in character for her to do that, to have electric powers, including controlling technology using her mind, just because she has control freak sides of her. But in time, the three worlds would just turn her more wild, like a big electric lightning storm and rain. She might be able to conjure a storm in the future, who knows? And I feel like that says a lot about her development and growth as well. When her powers first come up in exposure, spoiler free, she is challenging a status quo in her life. It's the first time she becomes quick to act in this way, and she ends up becoming better at taking actions and ends up having this sort of ingrained, focused battle mind as she learns to fight. Okay, so that's enough about her descriptions. We're going to talk a bit more about her stories now. Her story in book 1, Exposure, is kind of finding this steadiness when the world is ever changing. Just trying to find things to hold on to. Because the world changes like mad, and the changes are some things that you don't want to happen. I feel like everybody has had a moment in their lives where one grandiose change happens outside your control, and you don't even have the power to fight back. And this change can come in many forms. That's what Exposure is about. This book stuck to me even more after I wrote it, because I ended up going through something not similar, but with the same kind of thing as Abby, the same kind of ideas, because I lost my job early in 2023. Don't worry, I got a job back. I'm still earning money now, a very steady and nice income. But this one thing, after so many like good and big changes, we had a big bad change. Just one bad thing making a lot change overnight for me. How was I gonna pay my rent? How was I gonna survive with food? It made me connect to Abby more, how much I threw my middle finger to the universe like she did. For the longest time, I was so shocked that I did not know what to do. But when I found my points of steadiness and the things that I knew I could count on, like she did, I accepted what happened. While I'm weary and kind of afraid of such a thing like that happening again, I know it's coming and I know to be ready for it. I got exposed and I can't come back. The world looks so different and I became a different person because of it. So Abby's journey is one where she accepts all that has happened to her. And then by chapter 25 in the climax, she has made the decision to accept and not move on, but move with the momentum of these changes. And in the midst of it, to find her control and her agency and her will to respond instead of just react. So what's next for Abby? Well, book 2 has got a lot of new things coming in. New mentors, new enemies, new crises, and I'm gonna be recruiting beta readers soon, so if you do want to be a beta reader for ASTER'S CODA Semblance, you can send me an email, amywriterrose@gmail.com. and you can come and help me out. Or you can also just hit my socials, my instant messages. If you want to help out in this step in telling the story of Abby Tacker, I would appreciate it. And if you haven't read book 1, you totally should. It's $1 until the end of July. But yeah, that's basically her story, and I'm excited to see the next steps of Abby as I write them. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you are new around here. You can ring that bell to find out when I post more creative content and find out when I go live for the book birthday live stream. You can sign up to my newsletter by heading to my website, amyrosenfeld.com, and while you're in the description, you can also check out my Instagram and my TikTok. Stay creative, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.